The Dick and Jane books were the way that millions of Americans learned how to read from the 1930s up and through about the 1970s or so. I personally miss the Dick and Jane books, but when I think about them, they conjure up mid-century Americana like almost nothing else does. But the image of the Dick and Jane books does change over time, because literally this is the major primer for teaching children how to read for decades, from the 1930s through to World War II and in the post-war period. So here are a few different editions of Dick and Jane books through the different decades so you can see what they look like. Dick and Jane were characters who were first rolled out in the 1930s from the Elson Gray primers. The curriculum would eventually become centered around Dick and Jane themselves, but in the early primers, there were only a few stories amid all the others that were teaching children to read. Here's one called The Old Doll, and you see Dick here with blonde hair and Jane as a brunette. In fact, Dick, for most of the rest of the history of the Dick and Jane books, is a brunette. So in the early days, he looks very different. Moving on to the 1940s, in the 30s and 40s, we have Dick, Jane, and Baby. Dick here has brunette hair, but we still have Baby instead of Sally. Here's a 1950s Dick and Jane reader, and indeed here we do see Sally as Sally rather than being called Baby. And finally, we have the 1965 edition that introduces a Black family into the neighborhood, Pam and Penny, who are twins, and Dick's best friend, Mike. You can literally see Spot run through decades.